Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, brought to you by TechStrong and WhiteSource. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of TechStrong Learning. We have an exciting presentation ahead, but first, I have a couple of housekeeping notes. First, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our session or you'd like to share the recording with a friend, the on-demand version will be made available shortly after the webinar concludes today. If you have any questions for Susan today, we want you to direct those to the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen. And if you have any comments for our topic, or you'd just like to let us know from where you're tuning in, I want you to direct those comments to the chat tab. We do have our slides available for download if you click on the handouts tab. So you can download and follow along right there if you'd like. And finally, at the conclusion of our webinar, we will have a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So stick around. On to our topic today. We'll be discussing application security scanning in the repository best practices. And I'm joined today by Susan St. Clair, Director of Product Management at WhiteSource. Susan, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to you. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you very much, Cody. I'm excited to be here. Hello, everyone, wherever you are joining us from. As Cody mentioned, my name is Susan. I am in the product group over at WhiteSource Software. Just very quickly, a little bit about myself and WhiteSource, if you're not familiar with. WhiteSource Software is a leader in the open source security detection remediation space. I've had the pleasure of being at WhiteSource for quite some time. And, previous to that, not to mention any names, but I have been in the application security space for, we'll just say a little bit. I don't think we need to put a number on that. So very excited to be here. Very much looking forward to any questions once we get to the end of that, or even if in the Q&A, as Cody mentioned, we'll try to address them as we go through. So without further ado, so I guess I'm sure most of us, well, maybe most of us, maybe it's just me, who remember back in the quote unquote good old days of AppSec and engineering releases, and when we could plan everything and have 2 releases a year. I can speak from my own personal experience having a product that I was in charge of. What we would do is we have, again, the 2 releases a year. Didn't really think about application security, was really more concerned about functional. Does it work? Do we add this new feature? Those sorts of things. And what would happen is that there would be a new mandate that came down. Hey, we have to scan. At that time it was static code analysis for the most part. We have to scan your application before release. What? I already committed to this deadline. I already said that it would be released at this certain time. So we would enter a queue of all the applications for this particular software company. We would go through the queue, we would get scanned, we would hand them our code, right, our built application. We would scan it, and then they would give us back a PDF of all the things that we needed to fix before we could actually release. Um, Again, full disclosure, we didn't really know what those results were other than they were a blocker before release. So there was a lot of back and forth. What is this? What does this mean? Do I have to fix it? Basically, if there was the exception process of, well, it's not really applicable to me. Maybe it's not exploitable, or maybe I'm not deployed into production. So that's really not as big a deal. Net, all of that work meant that whatever we had to fix, we would put into our backlog and then promptly forget about it if we could. And we then found ways to circumvent the system. So AppSec really wasn't part of our product uh, release mentality. Again, speaking from my personal experience, I'm sure those of you on the phone have something completely different. But we were able to get away with that to some point because, again, there was engineering and there was application security, and never the two will meet unless they were forced to. Wow, how times have changed. So if we take a look at this very colorful graph from 451, Research Voice of the Enterprise, DevOps Workloads and Key Project Report, which, wow, that's a mouthful. If we look at, how often organizations are deploying applications today, again, no longer twice a year, if you're lucky. The bulk of the organizations are deploying at a minimum monthly. So I can speak here at White Source. We deploy after every sprint, so every 2 weeks, we're actually pushing something into production. So certainly there is some variation, monthly, weekly, daily, hourly, even, especially if we're talking microservices and whatnot. But we can no longer wait for a week or two to be in that queue to be scanned, right? That's just not the way of the world. In addition, not only are we dealing with frequency, but really application security has changed in that it really is a team sport. As much as sometimes that causes us angst, as sometimes that seems, not to be the most efficient way. But really it has shifted into saying that, again, for me as a product owner or me as an engineering lead, I have to take into consideration application security. So really the shift and the onus has moved from, again, just being this niche over here that nobody really cares about other than, maybe your CISO or whatnot, to having the engineering and the development teams, be a part of this. So now certainly security has to be accountable and visible and set standards. But again, we're no longer the center of our own universe. We're just a small moon that kind of revolves around the engineering. In addition, we have additional technologies that maybe weren't in our particular wheelhouse. They weren't something that we really had to worry about. They were somebody else's problem, like containers, serverless functions, microservices to some degree when we look at cloud native. And then we also have this trend that everything is code. Everything is code. Infrastructure is code. Policy is code. Everything really truly is code. So all of these kind of themes, I guess, or challenges really have forced us to work together and make sure or make us need to be part of an engineering or developer's workflow. Again, back in the day, probably dating myself a little bit, although I'm not, again, no numbers involved here. When I first started in application security, so I made the jump from product in a application performance into moving into AppSec. Really the big thing was like, yeah, we're moving from this twice a year manual process where dev hands off the code to application security to we're going to put it in the pipeline. Awesome. I have automation now. I'm part of their workflows. I can put security gates in there. I mean, this is a big deal. Certainly, pipeline scanning has its place. I don't believe it will ever go away completely, but it does have some challenges. It certainly has some challenges to it. Every vendor has its own plugin, or insertion into a pipeline. So you need to maintain that. You have to actually get the scanning into the individual pipelines themselves, which depending on the scale of your organization, that might be a big deal, or that could be hundreds. You also have the scanning tool plugins requirements themselves. So sometimes they can conflict with others that you have already in your pipelines, or potentially even the application that you're building and testing themselves. Again, you have to update those, however that might be. And again, pipeline typically happen a little bit later, right? I check in my code, it goes through, the merge process, whatever the review processes in, and then it goes into the pipeline. So it's not crazy removed from where the developer sits, again, depending on the organization and the application that we're talking about, but it is a little bit later. So it can be harder and more costly to fix defects. Still a good idea, has some challenges. The next thing that really seemed to come out, or was a big thing, was scanning within the IDE. We want to shift left, and where's the developers? Well, they're in the IDE. That's where they live and breathe. Again, great idea. Um, I have my code there. If I'm fixing it, I can do my fix right there, check to make sure it works. Again, some of the challenges that I'm sure you all have experienced is that, first of all, there are so many IDEs out there. There's IDEs, there's, I mean, text editors that we use as IDEs, the different versions, the Mac versus Windows versus, I mean, it's very, very difficult to have good coverage at that level. The other thing is that, again, if I wanted as an AppSec, again, because I have the visibility, I need the visibility, I need the ability to enforce, right? That you scan, that you fix. It's very difficult to do that at an IDE level. Make sure people install the plugin, make sure they're scanning, make sure they're fixing. Again, from a compliance point of view, from a governance point of view, it's very difficult to do this at the IDE. Still has its place. AppSec is not a silver bullet. There is no silver bullet to solve the problem, but maybe not the best place to start off, especially for maybe more immature AppSec organizations. So on the far right, we have production. Production, again, ideally, we don't want application security vulnerability to get into production. Now, there are solutions there. The CSPM space is really amazing to me, like around the containers, monitoring drift, monitoring vulnerabilities in those containers. We certainly have other like endpoint solutions and WAFs and RASP and all that good stuff in that space as well. But again, once I get all the way over there, certainly, again, it's a good view of risk, of the actual risk that I'm exposing myself to, but it's hard to get it back into the dev life cycle in terms of, the fixing and the remediation and the triage. So where does that leave us? That leaves us at the code repository. So again, dating myself a little bit, I remember, just talking with customers, with my peers, in the industry, and this was like, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could just really be part of a workflow, right, within the code repository. So we've really started to see a lot of uh, the tooling to kind of plug into there with security alerts, not even traditional AppSec vendors, but certainly some of the DevOps platform vendors, if you will. And some of the benefits there is really, again, I'm getting all of my AppSec in one place. So again, I get my static code analysis potentially there. I get my SCA there. RASP or IAST and DAST are a little trickier because that's more runtime. But again, I can configure it in one place for multiple code repositories. I can get automated remediation with pull requests or merge requests. Policy enforcement, again, I can block, merges happening if they don't meet a policy. It just really, again, one, it shifts it left to get it closer to the development team and the engineering focus, while enabling adoption. So again, I'm not slowing them down, but I'm still getting my benefit. So again, just a different view in terms of, code repositories truly being central. And I- if I have one thing that I want people to get out of this, other than this is a really good approach to starting an AppSec program, as well as expanding adoption, is that there is no one-stop solution. Again, I truly believe that there's a place for IDE, there's a place for pipeline, certainly, integrating into ticketing systems, but really where the action is really this code repository. Again, I put some numbers here around GitHub that I just pulled from their site. I mean, 4 million organizations, over 73 million developers. And this is just GitHub. This is not, the private repositories like the on-prem, if you will. So the GitLab or even Bitbucket or GitHub Enterprise. I mean, but if we want to really truly get application security into the hands of the engineering teams, so it's not disruptive to them, it's just part of their normal process, this is where we really need to be at. So again, I think I probably covered this already, but some of the benefits, certainly shift left. We always want to shift left. We want earlier, or it's easier to identify, fix, less costly, certainly less stress. If I can fix them earlier before it gets out into the wild, out into the production. Again, easier deployment and maintenance. I can just deploy at an organizational level and then, impact or hook in to multiple code repositories. It's certainly in context. I'm not waiting for a pipeline to finish running. I'm not potentially, again, depending on how the IDE integration is. I'm not waiting for a scan to come back into the IDE. Everything is right there. Again, the issues, the pull requests, the remediation, all of that, the explanation of the issue, all of that is in the code repository, which I'm already, working in. Um, and again, automated remediation, I think, is a big deal. Certainly, detection is one thing. We can't fix what we don't know that we have, but really at the end of the day, I don't want my engineering team to have to come and be a security expert, right? So anything that I can do for them to fix issues that are found in an automated way, the better. So, like I said, there's really been a shift in the tooling community for these repository integrations. Whether it's a pure code scanning, like an app that does the scanning as part of your code repository, or potentially even a GitHub action. Although I tend to think that is more pipeline per se, but you know. It's out there. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody, wants to do it. But there are some good repository integrations and maybe ones that are a little bit still immature. So as you go back to your day to day, as you go back out into your life, what are we really looking for? So in terms of an immature approach to the tooling itself, again, we should really be looking or tools that scan and report and create pull requests and merge requests for everything. It sounds like a good idea at the time, not so great in real life. Again, what happens is then you get a ton of noise, you get a ton of pull requests, and you get a lot of policy failures that are blocking. So again, what happens? We don't listen. We either ignore it or we disable it because it's impacting our ability to deliver as an engineering organization. The other piece of the immature approach, which I think is important, that I don't know, it's the first thing that really pops into people's mind, is that, we really should not just be focusing on the negative. Certainly, it's important that hey, we detected this and hey, we should fix this and there's an issue associated with it. But we should also be looking for these toolings to say like, hey, you fixed this in here. Well, you also fixed da 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 da, right? So a positive feedback loop is also important when we start to get into tooling. And the reason for that is kind of twofold. Certainly, the negative aspect of an immature repository integration is that, again, oh, it's too noisy. It's not providing a lot of value. It's really impacting my ability to deploy and get things done to support the business. But then we also want to support and say, hey, you guys are doing good things. You're fixing more than one thing at a time. So again, this sort of integration should really support both. All good things, all good things. So those are the things that we don't want. What exactly do we want? Okay, so best practice number one, scan on commit. So again, um, this is kind of getting back to, we don't want to be super noisy. We don't want to overscan. We don't want to over report. If I'm merging into, I guess let me take a step back. So I really want to focus on what's different. This is not an incremental scan. So incremental scans traditionally, incremental scans is like, well, I just changed this one little piece of code or this one section of code. I'm going to just scan that and that's it. Okay. So it's really typically meant when we talk about incremental scanning, especially in the static code analysis space, it's really typically meant to speed up the scans because they can sometimes take a really long time. What this is really focusing on is saying, well, I scanned, your code, I scanned everything. And when you merge this particular piece in, I noticed that you, with this code, introduced or fixed, right? Positive feedback loop, these things, right? So I can relate specifically these issues to your changes. Okay. So again, a little bit different than an incremental scan. Of course, then if I detect it, I want to, again, create an issue potentially or open up a pull request or a merge request for the errors that I introduced, not everything under the sun that might be in this code repository or in this branch. So the second best practice, very related, right, is really we want to focus on the difference. And this really kind of gets back to the whole idea of a security backlog. So if you scanned, especially legacy applications, with your security tool of choice, um, probably, unless you've been really focused on application security and fixing those things, probably you're going to have a pretty significant backlog of issues that it detected. But again, I want to focus on what is in this feature branch um, versus what might be in the backlog. Okay, so I'm looking at the addition of new security bugs. I'm looking at, again, potentially fixing security bugs in my backlog in my base, but I want the tooling to be aware of this and to not just, again, scan the whole darn thing over report, and then I'm like, I can't deal with this. I have things to do that aren't related to security. And then we ignored it. Again, I want to be very focused on in this feature branch, in this dev branch, what have you. These are the issues that are with that branch versus looking at the base branch, which is probably deployed, and looking at that backlog. Okay. Good question. This is my bad. There is a question around what is a PRMR. See, this is how you get lazy about not explaining your acronyms. So a PR is a pull request, an MR is a merge request, just depending on which code platform that you might be using. They might be using their own terminology. Best practice number 3. Dun dun dun. Again, this kind of gets back to the difference between, application security, uh, application security having kind of one mindset where they're very focused on risk of what might be deployed or about ready to be deployed in production and wanting to scan everything and report on everything. Um, versus maybe the way engineering focuses or does the work. So the best practice number 3 is around looking at excluding non-based branches from your security or your risk reporting. So if we think about outside of security, right? So I'm writing a feature or fixing something or doing some code maintenance, right? In a non-based branch, it might have bugs. If I'm the developer, there really is no might about it. It will have bugs, right? So that's part of the process, right? I write, I do unit testing, I fix. That doesn't mean that when we, get to the end, that I want to report all those bugs necessarily, right? I might report them internally as part of the sprint process, but I'm not going to report them as the overall quality metrics of this application, right? As it gets deployed. So it's the same sort of thing with application security. So again, I'm in my feature or my dev branch, and I'm adding things, I'm deleting things, I'm changing things, what have you. That's a work in progress, and we want to encourage people to check for security early and often. So as they find things and as they fix things, that isn't necessarily something that I'm going to report in my big security backlog of here's the high, medium, low vulnerabilities that I might have. Right. Again, it would be something that I would track as an engineering or as a product person. Again, as part of the overall quality of a particular sprint, but it isn't something that I would report up to the CISO or up to a high level manager about the security quality of my application. So again, having the tooling be aware of different branches and having the ability to configure what is reported and what isn't reported is certainly something that you would like to look for or implement as a best practice as part of your practice. All right. So best practice number 4. I feel like this is really, again, it's a tooling thing, but I think it's also, organizations that realize that application security is super important. Maybe they haven't done it in the past, or it's just been kind of an ad hoc process, like with a pen test or something, prior to deployment or as part of a certification or compliance process. They tend to scan everything, right? Um, I want to know everything about this application, and I'm going to fix everything, or even maybe not that bad, or even I'm going to scan and break and report all high vulnerabilities, whether it's open source or custom code. Sounds like an amazing idea, right? Makes sense, makes logical sense. Um, the problem with that, again, is especially if you haven't been doing application security, is that now I'm looking for a lot of different things. So I can create a lot, even if they're true positives, I can create a lot of results. And now I just added a ton of issues to my backlog. Nobody likes that. And the reality is they're probably not going to fix them, right? So I think that in terms to build credibility, in terms of to build confidence, in terms of actually doing logging things that I'm actually going to fix, we want to start small. So what's important to your organization? Again, so this is where engineering and AppSec really partner and become a team. Is it super important that you've identified as an application security professional, that we fix all of the SQL injections or maybe all of the command injections, right? We're really concerned about those. We want to make sure we get all of those out. Or in open source, do we want to make sure that we get all of the libraries that have a CVSS score of over 9? Right? Again, those are super important. We're really worried about those. So you create policies in terms of creating issues, and then, of course, the associated merge request or pull request associated with those particular policies. So you get a handle on those. You build the confidence within your engineering teams that this stuff is real. It's not completely crashing me being able to get something out the door. You build that sort of discipline into the process, into the organization. And then when you can, then you expand it, right? But the idea is to make progress, not to like swamp, your development teams with all of these security bugs all at once. And I would say that even though this is kind of in the context of code repository, being scanning in the code repository, this is actually true, I would say, across the board. So, pipeline, um, IDEs, potentially as well. Again, the idea isn't just to, and I think this is something that we fall into a lot in the AppSec world. The idea isn't to find things. The idea, the goal is to find things so we can fix things. And sometimes we have to start small and then work our way up before we get to that. There's a question of, if you have a large code base, can I have the repo security scan a nightly job? Sure. I mean, if it makes sense, I would potentially, want to ask more questions around that in terms of, you know, does it make sense to do that, or does it make sense to do upon a commit or a merge or some other sort of trigger? So then you can kind of get more of the real time feedback loop closer to when a code change actually happened. But again, just like anything in life, the answer is, could you do that? Sure. It depends. Does it make the most sense or not? Depending on, your code base and your culture and your organization and, all good things like that. So I thought I had one more slide, one more best practice. I guess not. So we're at the questions. I know it was kind of probably short and sweet, but we thought this was a really good topic. So we wanted to certainly make a lot of time for questions, as y'all think about them. So if I had to recap, all people are thinking of questions potentially that they might want to ask. I do think this acceleration or this migration to having engineering and application security more and more integrated, I see that continuing. So as we get tighter into the code repositories, into those systems, maybe for our, I don't want to say lightweight scanning because I don't think that's the right word, but kind of our day-to-day scanning. And then doing the maybe deep dive, full bomb or bill of materials. We do that in the pipeline scanning. And then, we even see some of the production tools starting to kind of reach back or trying to reach back, um, into the pre-production world. So I do see this kind of integration, especially as, GitOps takes hold, especially as, a lot of these infrastructure is code, everything is code, kind of tying everything together, the separation of state, if you will, becoming less and less. So really, truly starting to get to more of an integrated application security process. So I don't see any Q&A. And by the way, hello, everyone who said hello in chat. Hello back. It's so nice to see such a good range of attendees from various places around the world. Okay, I don't see any Q&A, so I guess I would hand it back to you, Cody.
So I'll give our audience another minute or so to ask any questions while I go through a couple of our closing housekeeping notes. So a quick reminder to everyone in our audience that the session was recorded. So you'll receive an email with a link to access the on-demand recording shortly after we conclude today. And you can find the recording living on the DevOps website. Just visit devops.com/webinars. It should be there by tomorrow. We also have 4 winners of $25 Amazon gift cards. Our first winner is Keen H. Our second winner is Tanya Q. Our third winner is Ian G. And our fourth and final winner is Sinisa Z. So keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. And if you don't see an email, just check your spam folder. So it does look like we actually received 2 more questions if you want to touch on those before we close out. The first one is, what are the tooling you think is right for scanning the repositories, SAST or SCA?
So I'm guessing that the question is more not so much like which vendor or which, specific tool is the right one, but more around, what makes sense. Do I scan for a custom code with SAST, or do I scan for SCA type vulnerabilities as part of a code repository? I think I actually think both make sense, to be honest. And I would even add, again, maybe infrastructure as code, which might be stored in your code repository as well. I don't see any. There are caveats again in terms of what's stored in your code repository, and do you need to build things? So maybe it makes more sense to be in the pipeline, but just as a standard answer without any details or specifics, I would say that I think they both make sense. There's no reason to not do one versus another at the code repository level.
Awesome. And we have one more.
Mhm.
And the question reads, a new vulnerability arises. While scanning your repository, you realize there are applications in production. What do you do?
What would I do? What would I do? Not answer Slack? I'm not sure. In terms of, again, I'm thinking that again, you maybe again, this is a legacy application. You haven't really had a lot of discipline around application security, and and you just started, and you're like, holy cow, I just scanned this particular application, and this thing is deployed, right? So I think it depends on what do you do. It depends, obviously, I think, on the criticality and the exploitability of said vulnerability. If it is like something like Log4j, right, which just happened a few months ago. That was something that was a new vulnerability was found within certain versions of Log4j, very widely deployed and in use logging library for Java. Um, that there were known exploits out there. So if I didn't know that my application use that, or I didn't know that there was a vulnerability associated with that, and then I got that scan result and I heard the news and all that, I mean, that would be like, okay, we have an emergency change request process that we need to do. We need to fix it, and then again work with change management, with potentially incident response to get that fix out there as quickly as we can into production. For less dramatic findings that you wouldn't know about, again, I would work it depending on your backlog. I would work it into, an upcoming sprint or whatnot to actually fix. Again, it all comes back to kind of the urgency and the criticality and the exploitability of a vulnerability, versus like when do I schedule it versus, as well as notify, for something in production. Hopefully that answered your question.
So we've gotten a few more questions in, so we're just going to keep running through them until we
Lovely.
stop getting them.
I love
So
it.
the next question reads, what can you do to reduce the noise for monolithic repos?
Yeah. So again, I think that this is where we just have to be smart about scanning. I know easier said than done, right? But this is where, again, you know, what are you looking for? What I mean, yes, we want to find all high vulnerabilities and fix them, and yes, we, potentially wanted this, but this is really about being focused, in my opinion, in terms of what you're looking for. So kind of getting back to, am I looking for a certain, CVSS score? CVS, yeah, that one's hard for me to say. If I'm looking at open source, am I looking for potentially a specific exploit path, right? So like network or something like that to prioritize. Am I looking at actually, reachability of a particular, so if I have an open source library that's declared or that, is detected, does it actually reach into my code? Right? So I should prioritize it over maybe something that is just detected, but I'm not actually calling for my code. Is there specific, again, injection error? So again, I would that's what I would do. I would really look at what's important. Again, I think there's another question around dev dependencies if we're talking open source, so excluding those and really looking at what actually gets into, production. But I would say try to look at, what you're scanning for, what you're prioritizing, and just be, again, focused. Very long answer.
Awesome. So we've got one more at the moment, and it reads, it's kind of a long one, so bear with me. We are currently experimenting with integrating white source with Azure DevOps. We have several Node JavaScript repositories. We see that it's creating a ton of PRs, especially with libraries designated as dev dependencies. Is there a need to creating a policy to ignore these if needed?
So in terms of the actual product, I would have to look into it. I would say, again, you can ping me offline, or I'm not sure how this works actually. We can follow up with that, but there should be a way to exclude that, whether it's a policy or maybe there's some configuration, in the white source configuration files as part of this. So certainly I think that makes sense. Sorry, I don't have a specific answer to that one.
So that is all that we've received at this point in time. So I'll go ahead and give you the floor one more time just so you can wrap up and leave us with anything you want to leave us with.
Thank you. Thank you. It- the when I talk to customers here and at other places, there was always this challenge from application security. I can't get the adoption. Um, my DevOps people are like, no more plugins. I'm not putting anything into a pipeline, or it's taking too long. There was always this like really everyone wanted to do application security, but getting like the buy-in from engineering specifically was typically difficult, even though everyone saw the need. So I think that, by looking at this code repository scanning approach, I do think it's a game changer. It absolutely is a game changer. It's just about making it um, about doing it in a smart way, right? So a tool regardless of the tool, and without an approach and without a goal and without a strategy, you know, it's not going to help anything. So take a look at this, be smart about how you actually approach things. And it's truly been my pleasure. Thank you for all the great questions. And I look forward to hearing from you all in the future.
Well, thank you, Susan, for taking the time to be with us and answering all of our questions. I'd also like to thank WhiteSource for sponsoring today's webinar. And my final thanks goes to you, our audience. We appreciate you being here with us for today's live webinar. Please take a moment to fill out our post-webinar survey, and we hope to see you at a future TechStrong Learning webinar. This is Cody J. Brown signing off.